Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 586.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cashflow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you are here today because we have something incredibly important to talk about today. Because one of the things that I think many of us lack is perspective. And yet, at the same time, one of the things that I believe many of us entrepreneurs have is perspective. It's an advantage and can also be a disadvantage at times, but I do believe it's because of our perspective why we take on the things we take on. I mean, yes, we could easily be job takers, but no, we like to be job makers. And at the end of the day, it takes more effort, more energy, more care, concern in order to go out there and face the challenges that are in front of us, take on the world and make it happen. Now, I happen to have with me today someone who exemplifies all of those things and has a different perspective than you and I probably have on everything that's going on today. But more importantly, he's got a story that I believe will help you understand that many of the things that you are endeavoring to do, it's okay to delay that gratification and let them pay off later because they can give you assurance that you're headed in the correct direction. Who am I talking about? I am, of course, talking about Thomas Jones, former vice chairman. Now, guys, listen to this. This all means that he's been there, he's done that, and he's still doing it. And it's really important that you understand. So, former vice chairman, president, and CEO of TIAA-CREF. Now, if you don't know what that is, just go really, really, really large pension system, largest in the country. Former vice chairman of Travelers, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and Freddie Mac, and the former chairman and CEO of Smith Barney Asset Management. Now, there's more to that title, if that wasn't enough. But today, he operates as the founder and senior partner of venture capital firm TWJ Capital, and he's written a new book, From Willard Straight to Wall Street, a Memoir. We're going to talk about all of these things, but honestly, guys, right now, what you should be doing is scrambling for something to write with, something to write on, getting ready to bookmark and mark those spots where you're going to need to listen again and again and again, because we got some stuff to learn. We've got some perspective to gain. So let's get ready to listen, love, and learn from Thomas Jones. Thomas, how are you doing?
Good, Jay. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm excited and I'm feeling fortunate at this particular moment in time, sir. So I definitely appreciate you taking the time. Now, this being the first time that you're here, I have to ask you the same question I tend to ask everybody else the first time that they're here. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes. For example, Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, etc. Because I think entrepreneurs and superheroes have a ton of things in common. Like, I can envision myself as an entrepreneur occasionally, flying around town, possibly wearing tights and a cape, who knows? But I'm saving my customers one sale at a time. Also, though, like a superhero, an entrepreneur has a beginning. So if you think about Spider-Man, there was a time where he was just a kid going to school, taking some photos, then one day gets bit by a spider, discovers he's got a superhuman ability, and then he has to choose whether to use it for good or for evil. So My question to you is as follows. Before all of the accolades, before even being the CEO of Global Investment Management at Citigroup, former treasurer at the John Hancock Insurance Company, and everything else, because the list is long in your case, everything else that everyone knows you for, what we want to know is, who is Thomas Jones?
Well, I'm the fellow that was on the cover of Newsweek magazine 50 years ago in April 1969. I'm holding a rifle in my right hand. I have a knife in my belt, war club dangling from my belt. My left hand is raised in a Black Power salute. And if you can believe it, that was at Cornell University, at Willard Straight Hall. And you can say, well, how do you come to be in a place like that, a student at Cornell University? And Jay, it's, it's a story of, as a young man, as I understood American history, I'm an African American. And as I delved into the history of this country, I came to feel that my generation was the generation where the random wheel of history had turned and said, it stops here. That my generation was tasked with the job of saying, we have to raise the price of oppression in America. And the way you raise the price of oppression is you fight about it. So that's where I was as a kid. And I was 19 years old, just turning 20. But an incredible thing happened. America was at a crossroads then, and kind of a fork in the road, okay? And it could have taken, the right fork, which would have been oppression and suppression of kind of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Or it could take the left fork, which was kind of opening up, trying to live up to the ideals which are in our Constitution and Declaration of Independence and Bill of Rights. And America chose to take that left fork. And 50 years later, I think this country has come so incredibly far, further than, I think if you described America today to most observers back in 1969, they would have said, this country cannot possibly change that much. But we have. We have in ways that have opened opportunity for millions and millions of people to receive better education, better employment opportunities. We have had African Americans achieve success in virtually every profession and occupation in the country. We've even had an African American elected as the president of the country. We've had millions of African Americans raise themselves out of poverty into the middle class and even higher. And so when I look around today, I say that a miracle has happened. And this country should be proud of that miracle, even as we recognize we're not a perfect society. There's still work to do, but we should be very proud of how far we've come. So I'm the guy who was a kid who was ready to be a frontline fighter. And now, 50 years later, I'm proud of what this country has accomplished and want to speak out to encourage others to also be proud of what we've accomplished. And in a certain way, my life story, the business progress, my business career is a microcosm of the American progress story in the last 50 years. And so that's who I am, and that's the story that my book tells.
As many things that were going through my mind. For example, one of the last things you just said was that you were frontline fighter. And I guess the question that comes to my mind is, compared to the guy that was on the cover and who you are today, did the fight, did it look like you thought it was going to look? Was it different? And if so, in what way?
It is different. When first I was pleasantly surprised that America took the path of opening up opportunity instead of the path of oppression. And then, when I thought the country was opening, and I thought the toughest fight would be in the business world, because that's where the money is, that's where the wealth is, and that's often what people fight about. And so I wanted to go into business and try to be one of those who fought that fight. And Jay, I figured I had almost no chance of success whatsoever. Here I was. It was the first wave of African Americans coming into corporate America in the early 1970s. And here I was, the guy who had just been on the cover of Newsweek in 1969. So I'm the black radical from Cornell. So I figured I have, next to zero chance of success. But I needed to try. And what I discovered was, I told myself, you've got such a small chance of success that psychologically you can't allow yourself to be dependent on positive reinforcement and praise in the workplace, because you're probably not going to get it. You've got to approach this in a way that you provide your own psychological support. And, as I thought through it, I figured, the only things that you can control are your attitude, your demeanor, the way you carry yourself, and your work effort, okay? And I said to myself, I'm going to have a positive attitude every day. I'm going to carry myself, as professionally as I can. And I'm putting forth a 100% effort every day to do my absolute best at whatever it is that I'm working on. And, and that way, on any given day, if I get fired, I'm going to feel like, well, you did your best. And that's all that a person can possibly do. And I discovered something, Jay.
Okay.
I discovered that, like most people, I was socialized to think that an A is the best a person can do. We're socialized because, you get an A in school, but an A in school is like 90, 95 on the test, okay? But that's not 100%. That's not 100. And it doesn't sound like a lot. And, the difference between getting 95 on the exam and getting 100 doesn't matter that much on any given exam. And frankly, the difference between 95 and 100 doesn't matter that much on any given work assignment, typically. But if you actually deliver 100% every day, day after day, and week after week, and month after month, there's actually quite a gap between the work effort associated with 100% commitment and the work effort associated with a 90 or 95% commitment. And, it becomes a discernible gap between you and your peers who are competing with you over the course of a year. Over the course of 5 years, it becomes an almost insurmountable gap in terms of the effort and achievement. And I discovered that in corporate America, the guys who are at the top are they're kind of like sports coaches. They get to the top not because they do all the work. They get to the top because they build teams of people who get the work done. And so the most successful senior executives are often people that are looking to build teams. They're, in a way, they're almost always scouting for talent. And these guys began to notice me. And without even realizing what was happening, people would show up to see a piece of work that I was doing or a presentation that I was doing. And then they would begin to, they would invite me to lunch and, invite me to coffee. And it would always start with just professional conversations about, the projects, the work, the clients, and so on. And then slowly it would get into a little more personal probing, my family, my background, my outlook on life, and eventually evolved to where people began to pick me up and they became my mentors. And it happened despite race. It happened because they said, this is a guy who's getting the job done, and he puts in an extraordinary effort and he's a really positive attitude and he really carries himself professionally. So that was a surprise to me. I didn't expect. Like I said, I figured I had almost no chance of success. But that combination of attitude and demeanor and work effort ultimately meant that I had a series of mentors who just lifted me and promoted me and compensated me, protected me. That's part of what a mentor does. Not everybody liked me. There were people who would have fired me because I was the black radical from Cornell. But I got protection from my mentors. And so a corporate career unfolded, over the course of 40 years, which would have been something that was beyond my wildest dreams.
And there's a thought process, I guess, a lot that I can't because, and as a human, you can fill that in with almost anything. I can't because I'm tall, short, skinny. And in my case, I've often had a very similar thought. I live in Orange County, California, and I remember when I was getting into the sales game, one of the things that I was looking at was the percentage of African Americans that live out here, and it's less than 2%. So it's like, oh wow, the cards are not stacked in my favor, because it's really easy in a lot of sense to adapt a helplessness mentality. I'm saying that and using that as a comparison because what I've had to deal with is nothing compared to what you've had to deal with, and yet you still chose to persevere when it wasn't necessarily accepted. And I can only imagine that friends and family and people who knew you said, like, why go over here? Do this should be easier. Why are you struggling with that? So I have to understand, where does that motivation come from? And more importantly, how do you develop that kind of fortitude in what honestly was an aggressive environment?
Well, and you're quite right, Jay, in your observation that often it's our own attitudes that are a great barrier to people actually putting forth their best efforts or taking on really tough challenges. It takes a level of belief, self-belief, and self-confidence. It came to me in part because of a childhood event. I was in public schools in New York City, in Queens, the St. Albans, which is in Queens County, New York, one of the suburbs of Manhattan. I was in the public schools at that time in the late 50s. The New York public schools were, middle-class families came to New York public schools because of the quality of the education. I always, as a kid, I had been an avid reader. I was fortunate. My dad was a scientist. He was he had a master's degree in physics from Indiana University. He had started his career as a young black boy in in Charlotte, North Carolina in the early 1900s. Started out with 2 strikes against him. He was dark-skinned and he was heavy-set in a really harshly racist society. He lifted himself, deep faith in God, and deep faith in the power of education. And he lifted himself first through the church, which was the primary avenue of opportunity for a black man in the early 1900s in the South. But he always believed in science. And, because to him, science was objective. It didn't matter what color you were. If you were a scientist and could figure out the problems, then, it didn't matter what your color was. And so even as he was a minister, he pursued, as I said, a master's in physics at Indiana University, passed the licensing exam to become a professional engineer. And then as America began to open up just a little bit, he got more opportunities. And so we happened to be in New York in the 1950s because he had gotten a job at American Bosch Arma Corporation, which was doing the Atlas missile guidance system. And he got that job in 1957 because of the Russian Sputnik. And, the way that launch just galvanized America with fear that the Russians were going to outperform us in space. And so, there was such a sense of urgency that a black guy like my father could get a job. It didn't matter what his color was. It mattered what he knew in his mind. And he got a job as senior engineer on the Atlas missile guidance system at American Bosch Arma Corporation on Long Island in New York. So that's why we were living in St. Albans. I was an avid reader. And at that time, the public educational philosophy was that if you had a really smart kid, you accelerate them, meaning you skip grades. Now the current philosophy is you enrich them, you enrich the material. But at that time, the philosophy was you accelerate. And so I skipped in New York public schools, I skipped the 4th grade and the 8th grade. And so by the time, I'm going to high school I'm 12 years old, okay? Mm-hmm. And, kids can be very cruel, Jay. And so, I was a good athlete and all of that, but, the guys that I used to hang with in the playground and, touch football and basketball and all of that, baseball, stickball, there were elements, and, it's a black community. St. Albans was probably the most prosperous black community in New York City. It's where, the stars like, Duke Ellington and James Brown and Count Basie and people like that live. We weren't on the same block that they were on, but they were in, parts of St. Albans. But kids, the guys in the playground, they started putting me down because I skipped these 2 grades, so now I'm younger than everybody, my peers in school, and it was just like, I can remember it just like it was yesterday in my own mind saying, I'm not going to let these people make me feel bad about myself because I skipped 2 grades, as though I've done something wrong. I'm not, I said, I'm not going to let these people define me in a way that's a negative. I just refuse that. And it became a mindset that, whatever it is, I'm always going to define myself. I will not let others define who I am. And I became a little bit of a loner, a little bit of an outsider. because I had this little chip on my shoulder. You know, if you wanted to be my friend, that was great. But if you were going to put me down because I was younger than you know, everybody else in the class, well, that was fine too. You know, if you wanted to be that, okay with me. If you wanted to be a friend, that was okay with me. I was just going to be myself, you know, try to be friends with people, extend friendship. You know, if people wanted to do the psychological put down, then I just had my own shell. I'm oblivious to it. Nothing you can do that's going to hurt me. And that became the mentality that kind of, you know, that shell, you know, that self-possession was how I then came to feel like, even though I was facing next to impossible odds, I would still give it a try, because it was, you know, it needed to be tried, and I knew I was one of those people that should give it a try, even though I didn't think I would be successful. But I had the psychological framework and self-confidence to do it, and that's key.
So then, based upon that, I have to assume that between, you know, having to deal with the SEC and dealing with everything that happened around Citigroup or Citi at the time, I'm assuming that comes into play there as well, to be able to give you the ability to get through the downs, because entrepreneurs today often, it may be way more accepted than it used to be, that things don't always go well. And yet one of the things that, at least that I have learned, that I have to learn to protect, is my mental state, especially during those times where things are, what did you say? You said when it feels like you are facing next to impossible odds. So assuming that the person listening hasn't had this type of experience yet, how can one create this psychological framework that you were talking about that clearly has proven to be of major asset for you, so that we can hope to do something that it even mimics, echoes some of the changes and challenges and things that and accomplishments that you've had?
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and I'm glad that you are enjoying what you are hearing thus far. But here's one of the things that's really important. One of the most important things that you can do is get started. One of the things that I've said before, and I say again, once you get started, stay started. But more importantly, there can be lots of roadblocks to getting started. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove one of those roadblocks for you and make it a little bit easier. Because the thing that I don't want to stop you is thinking, do I need a local number? How about a long distance number? Or should it be 800? How on earth am I going to make that happen so that people can contact me as I'm out there building my business, making my cash flow grow? But most importantly, understanding that it doesn't have to be difficult. Many of you may know, but if you don't, there's a company out there by the name of Grasshopper. And what I want you to do is I want you to go over to trygrasshopper.com/cashflow diary. Grasshopper is the entrepreneur's phone system. It works like a traditional phone system, but requires no hardware to purchase, no software to install. It's just a number that flat works. So if you are out there building that distributed workforce across many different locations, it's a way for you to still go out there and make your number be unified, simple, easy to use, something we've been using for quite some time. So again, go over to trygrasshopper.com/cashflow diary. Now, let's get back to the rest of the story.
One part of it, Jay, is that belief in yourself. And here I would emphasize, most people never figure out what they're capable of because most people never put 100% effort into trying to be their best. And you don't know what you can do until you give 100% effort to trying to excel and do your very best. It's a gift. I mean, it's what I call self-actualization. It's a wonderful gift that you can give to yourself to find out what your highest potential is. and that means really, really, really work hard to the point where you say there's nothing more that I could have done. And that's a victory. I mean, you may not, it may not be a classic victory. Not everybody's going to win, the championship. But, it is a victory to have done 100%, that you gave your best performance. And you walk off the field saying, I know what it is to give 100%, and I'm proud of that. And when you learn what that capacity is, you learn how to master that and guide it and channel it. And you will find arenas where that ability to give 100% will make you successful. So that's part of it, learning to give your best. The other part, to me, it's spiritual. I mean, I one of the things I got from my father were the things I described to you earlier, his belief in God, his faith in God, his belief in the power of education. Third leg, his belief in the power of hard work, okay? So with regards to faith, I've had one of the things I talk about in the book is my faith discipline. And, that's been developed over the years. It doesn't happen accidentally. It requires work. And, when I faced the challenges late in my career, you referred to, I was hung out to dry by Citigroup. I was fired. I was in the midst of a Securities and Exchange Commission investigation of the company. The company settled the case, but didn't include me in the settlement. And that was like putting a sign on my back. I'm sure that the people at the Securities and Exchange Commission said, oh, gee, the company must think he did this, that he did something wrong if they're settling the case with us and not protecting him. I mean, because, big companies like that, Citigroup, they had, I can't tell you how many SEC cases they had in a 10-year span, and never, ever, ever did they settle a case without protecting the senior executives that were involved until it came to me. And they settled the case. I wasn't included. Next thing you know, the SEC is bringing a case against me personally, okay? And I tell the story in my book, how I had to turn to my faith for comfort. And one of my prayer disciplines was a prayer that all things work together for good to those who love God. And so what I prayed for in the midst of that crisis, when it looked like, they thought they had just chopped me down to nothing, looked like my career was over, the papers were full of negative headlines every day because the Citigroup public relations machinery was just firing up, all these stories and innuendo against me. And in that crisis, I prayed. I told my family, said, I didn't do this. I said, we'll eventually come out of it, but it's going to take time. And I said, I need time to meditate and pray. I need quiet time to meditate and pray and think through what to do. And in my prayers that all things work together for good to those who love God, what I prayed for was help me understand how to see the good in what's happening here. Help me to understand how to grapple and find the good. And, took me a couple of weeks of prayer and meditation, but then I was ready. I picked myself up. I got off my knees. I picked myself up, and I was ready to fight. Okay? I had a strategy, and, so the lesson there is All of us are going to go through times of trial. Life is going to have times of trial. And in one's time of trial, it makes a tremendous difference if you have spiritual faith that can sustain you. And, 10 years later, all things work together for good to those who love God. 10 years later, I discovered I had been blessed in 3 ways. That whole ordeal, I had come out of it blessed. Okay? The first blessing was that I was enormously better off financially because I had sold my Citigroup stock when they fired me in late 2004 and got out at $48 a share. Okay, by 2008 it was $3 a share because the guy that fired me had run the company into the ground and it had to be taken over by the government. Second, I had built my own business. Third, so I was better off, much better off financially. Second, I was better off physically. My physical health was vastly better because, I had been working this 100% effort every day for 40 years, okay? And until I stepped away from it, I didn't fully realize what a cumulative toll it takes. And so I was better off once I started my own business, and that's hard, but it's a different kind of hard. It's not like running all around the world and trying to manage thousands of people and all that. It's a different kind of hard. It's a hard that's all within your own control. And so I was better off physically. My physical health was improved. And third, my spiritual health was improved because the ordeal had strengthened me spiritually. And my family had grown closer together by going through that spiritual ordeal together. And so it turned out, all things work together for good to those who love God. So the lesson is, you prepare yourself by knowing how to give 100% your best effort. Secondly, prepare yourself spiritually for the time of trial that you're going to face in life. We're all going to face it.
So here comes then what I would imagine is a question you've been asked many times and seems very obvious to me. After all of that, why keep going? I mean, you didn't have to start another business, but you did. You don't have to keep giving, but you do. You didn't have to write the book, but you have. So why?
Because that's life, it's at a couple of levels. To me, it's how to make life meaningful. So the book was written because I wanted to tell this story. As I say, I think my life has been a microcosm of the American race relations story over the last 50 years. And despite, the various negative things that happened to me, I think it's an overwhelmingly positive and hopeful story. It's a story of optimism, of faith and optimism and finding the best. I think that's a story that can be important for young people to understand. I think it's a story that's important for America to understand, that a story like this could only happen in America. Nowhere else in the world would the Tom Jones, Willard Straight to Wall Street story have been possible. So that's one reason to write the book. Another reason to write the book is because I need to try to do it's one of the ways that you derive meaning in life. That every year, going way back. And one of the things I talk about in my book is the disciplines I developed early on. I mentioned the work discipline. Another one was, starting in the late 70s, I started at the beginning of every year, I would put 3 goals in my calendar, 3 major goals for that year. Either some form of technical skill development or some kind of physical health improvement, exercise regimes or whatever. Sometimes it would be things like spiritual development. And every year, 3 major goals. And each month I would look at my calendar and kind of, what have you done with regards to achieving these 3 major goals? And so as an example, one of my goals in 1982, one of my goals was to read the Bible cover to cover. Because, it just occurred to me, excuse me, the Bible is arguably the most important book written in the history of the world. And I'm saying to myself, now, wouldn't it be foolish to be at the end of your life, be on your deathbed, and you're thinking back over the course of your life, and suddenly it occurs to you, I never read the Bible. How would you feel about that? Arguably the most important book written in the history of the world, the book that's had more impact on the world than any other. And I just said, this is something you need to get done. And I read the Bible cover to cover that year. And, it had a powerful influence on my life. So that discipline of 3 major goals achieved every year, 3 significant things every year, compounding that over the course of a lifetime has a powerful effect. And so, even as I'm getting older now, I'm 70 years old, and but I feel young, and I'm in, very good health, physically as well as spiritually. But I still, every year, I want to accomplish something positive. So writing the book took me 5 years. It's a tough task. Much harder. If I knew how hard it was, I might not have done it. But I'm proud of the way it turned out.
Understood. So,
I want to tell you 2 anecdotes, just.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. One is, I just want to touch on something going back to early in my career. When I'm thinking, you don't have much of a chance of success because you're the black radical from Cornell, and this is the first wave of blacks getting into corporate America in the early 70s. I got married in 1975, lady that's still my wife, so we're going on our 44th anniversary. Will be coming up shortly. And on our honeymoon, I talked to her about, my ideas on approaching life. And I told her, I said, 2 things in particular. I said, I don't have the skill set that I need to really succeed in business over time. I said, I'm doing very well right now, but I don't have, the skill set that I need in finance and accounting, and I should get an MBA degree. And since I don't want to step out of the workflow, I want to get a degree by going to night school. And, that's going to be sacrificial because it means that it's going to be like I'm working around the clock because I'm going to be working a full-time job and I'm going to be going to night school. And it means I'm going to have to be studying and papers and all that stuff on the weekends. And so, this is something not going to be a lot of parties, a lot of time for partying during the time that I'm going through that. So, that's something I want you to think about and opine on. And the second thing I said to her was, I said, we're both working, we both have good salaries. I said, I think we ought to try to live on one salary and save the other salary. And if we could save one salary for a couple of years, we'll have some money that we can invest. And, I said, now, the point is, it's not going to be easy to do, because if we're living on one salary, we're not going to be living the way most of our friends are. We're not going to be able to do the same kind of partying. We're not going to have the same vacations. We're not going to be going out to dinner like they're going out to dinner. We're not going to be able to buy the same new clothes. We're not going to be able to buy the same car. So, these are two areas of sacrifice I'd like you to, let's talk about. And, she's 100% in, absolutely. Let's try to do something together, And so we save her salary for a couple of years. And then I see that at that time, we're living in Boston. And one Sunday in the Boston Globe, I see this advertisement from the Boston Redevelopment Authority, advertising, kind of various derelict, abandoned buildings around Boston that the Boston Redevelopment Authority agency had taken over and was now advertising to be sold for redevelopment. We were in the south end of Boston, and one of the buildings, one of the ads talked about two buildings that were about 4 blocks from where we lived. We went and looked at them. They were burned out, abandoned brownstones, boarded up near the corner of Dartmouth Street and Columbus Avenue. So only about 4 blocks from Copley Square in Boston. And I'm saying, this is a great location. This is going to be a location over time, that's really valuable. We bid on the buildings. We were the only people in the whole city of Boston to even submit an application to buy the buildings. And make a long story short, 2 years later, we had redeveloped these 2 contiguous brownstones into a 10-unit apartment building. We lived in one of the units on the top floor, 2-bedroom apartment. We had a roof deck that was overlooking Copley Square. The building was cash flow positive within a year's time. 2 years later, we bought another 8-unit building. So now we had 18 apartments. And I'll tell you, to me, I'm saying to myself, I see a way forward, because if the corporate route doesn't work, I can be in the real estate business. And, this is a business that works with leverage. You got this mortgage, but then you've got operating cash flow. You've got operating revenue that goes up every year as long as you can raise the rents. A lot of the expenses stay relatively flat, especially the mortgage expense, if you've got that locked in. It's a wonderful business. So I tell that anecdote because I think your listeners should know, America's a capitalist society. Sacrifice, if you can, sacrifice to get some capital available to invest, to put capital to work for yourself. Don't always just be trying to make money through hourly work. It's important to try to make money by putting capital to work. And, that usually requires some sacrifice to accumulate the capital. So, that's one anecdote I wanted to tell. The other anecdote at the other end of my career, when I went into the venture capital business, the investment I'm most proud of is with a company called Floor and Decor Outlets of America. It was started by this brilliant entrepreneur in Georgia, Vincent West, whose family had kind of a home store business in Georgia that had been put out of business by Home Depot. Okay. And Vincent, he just had this brilliant vision with regards to stone and tile and wood and, other kind of hard surfaces. He had this beautiful vision of how to take these materials and create beautiful mosaics of flooring for dining rooms and kitchens and bathrooms and wall coverings and so on. And in his family business, before it had been bankrupted, Vincent had developed relationships with many of the sources of quarries and other sources around the world for some of the most beautiful stone and tile and ceramics and other similar products. So Vincent had a vision, which was, there's a problem when most people want to do something like redecorate their house. They go to a design store. Maybe they're working with a designer, maybe they're not. But they go to a design store or a tile shop, and they may see something on display there, and they order it, but they can't really take it with them because there's just some samples that are, in stock. And so the tile shop then places the order with the distributor, who places the order with an importer, and goes through 4 or 5 pairs of hands, each of which is adding 20% to the cost. And then when you get the product in, it may or may not match what you actually saw in the tile shop in the first place, because now it's coming from the quarry or whatever source at a different time. And so the colors of the stone may be slightly different. It's these natural products, they don't always look the same. So his idea was that he was going to start a business that would, go to his sources around the world and order products in ocean shipping container quantities and bring them into America and open up big footprint stores, 60,000 square foot stores. And, so he would have all this product on site, and then he would create these beautiful displays of examples of what do you do with this product? What are the design ideas that you can create with this product? And his economics were such, because of the quantities that he was operating in, he could price this like 40% below what you would have paid at the local tile shop, and he could still make 40% gross margins. Wow. So Vincent started a business. He got up to 9 stores. Some people that I know had invested with him. He got up to 9 stores, and they made a mistake. And the mistake was, when you're operating a business like that, Jay, almost all of your expenses are up front. So, when you want to open a new location, you've got to rent the space, you've got to refinish the space, you've got to import all the product to get on the floor there, you've got to hire staff and train staff, to sell the product and provide customer service and so on. So you're getting all these expenses up front before you've ever seen a nickel of revenue. So you've got to really understand the curve, the pattern at which your revenue growth will develop. Because otherwise you can't figure out, I've put all this money out, what's the rate at which I'm going to get it back? And unless you're really skilled at managing that expense curve against the revenue curve, you can really get yourself into trouble. And so Vincent's, company had gotten into trouble. They had violated, they had a bank loan, which is typical in that business, a loan that, finance cost, part of the cost of the inventory. They had violated some covenants. They hadn't actually missed any payments. But, they're usually in bank loans, there are covenants which are protective to the bank to give the bank early warning if things aren't quite working out as expected.
Right.
So they were in violation of bank covenants. The people I knew that had invested in them, they couldn't invest any more money. So it looked like they were headed to bankruptcy. And the folks I knew came to me and said, would you be willing to help us? And I said, well, I don't know, but I'll take a look. I know I can make speedy decisions, but it doesn't mean I'll help you, but I will investigate, and I'll give you an answer within a 30-day window. So I went and I spent a lot of time with this guy who had started it, Vincent West, visited all of his stores, and I came away convinced, he's got a pretty good idea, and he's a brilliant entrepreneur from a design point of view. This product he imports is really different than what you're going to see in the typical tile store. And they just made a mistake with regards to the hiccups of the revenue curve against the expense incurred up front. And so I invested $2 million in the business. I told them, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you an offer. I'll invest $2 million and cure, all the bank problems. And I said, I'm going to invest it on the same economic terms as your earlier investors. Now, people are surprised when you do something like that, Jay, because they think you're going to really take advantage of trouble. So I said, same economic terms, but there's always a but, there's a catch. The catch is I want my separate class of securities. So, if you gave them Series A preferred stock, I want, Series A prime or Series B preferred stock. And the key to that is my stock is going to have certain covenants. And the covenants are going to be geared towards what happens if we have problems. If we miss any bank payments, if we miss budgets, if we want to borrow more money, if we want to raise more capital, it's going to say that you can't do any of that unless you have a majority vote of my class of securities. So what that means is if everything is going well, we're all happy, we're all pari passu, everybody's treated equally. Right. It means if things don't go well, you got to go through me, okay? They accepted my offer. A couple of years later, invested another $3 million. We grew that out to 25 stores, a $250 million revenue run rate. It was acquired by Ares Capital Management out in Los Angeles, big private equity firm. They grew it out to like 50 plus stores, and then they took it public last year. Floor & Decor Outlets of America on the New York Stock Exchange now, ticker symbol FND. But I tell that story because this is, a guy like that, small town kid, country kid in Georgia, the vision and the energy to create this kind of business, this is what makes America really different economically from other countries around the world. That entrepreneurs like Vincent West, who's just got this brilliant talent with tile and stone and other hard surfaces and a brilliant idea for design, brilliant eye for design, that an entrepreneur like that can build a company that's now worth, somewhere, multiple billions of dollars. And that not only can he create that, but he can get the financing. He can get connected to people who can help him financially and in other ways. And that kind of, it's what I love about the venture capital world. Working with people like that is just uplifting. And it's what makes America great in the business world, because we create new businesses like that, more so than you see happening in places like Europe and Japan and Russia and China and so on. So anyway, those are just two anecdotes I wanted to share with you.
Yeah, there's so much. I'm just, it's great when one of the joys of being, a podcast host, if you will, is being able to run into, sample, experience the world from other individuals' perspective. And that's exactly, clearly what has happened today. And there's just been so much that's been served up here that I I tried to warn them at the beginning, you're going to be listening more than once, and you definitely made that the case. Now, for those that have listened this far, and they want to grab, more, what's going to be the best way for them to find out more about what you got going on, or maybe even grab a copy of the book?
Well, the book has a Facebook page, From Willard Straight to Wall Street. You can go there and click on the button and buy a copy, or you can go to Amazon.com and again just type in From Willard Straight to Wall Street, and it'll pop right up.
Love it. Now, I really must hear your answer to this question, because you are going to have I just know your perspective is going to be different. Because like I said, there's been a number of individuals who they started this conversation with you today in one particular place. They're ending in a completely different place. I'm ending in a different place. We're all ready to throw in and give 100% right now. And we're at what I like to call that precipice of decision. It's that point that humans, when we get there, oftentimes we have a companion. That companion comes in the form of a voice, and it says things like, are you sure? Really? I don't know. Look at this. And then for some people, they're related to that voice. So my question to you is as follows. Let's pretend that today they're going to follow through. They're going to do exactly what you suggest, and they're going to do so in the next 24 to 48 hours. So what should they do?
First step is believe in yourself. Second step is make a plan, that really think carefully about the plan to get from where you are to where you want to be, in kind of 1 year increments. And that discipline that I talked about, 3 significant accomplishments, 3 significant goals. I put it in a 1 year time frame, but you can pare that back. What are you going to get done this week, right? What significant thing are you going to get done this week to move you down that path towards the success that you're seeking? And then what's the significant thing that's going to get done this month to move you down that path? Because each week, the accomplishments of those weeks are going to add up to the accomplishment of the month, and the accomplishments of the month are going to add up to the accomplishments of the year. And the accomplishments of several years in a row will really move your life forward in ways that, you can only dream about right now. But you got to have that discipline and put in the effort and sustain it. When things don't go right away, don't be defeated. Maybe you got to make a course adjustment, but don't be defeated. Believe in yourself and believe in the power of 100% effort.
I love it a lot. So I just want to say thank you for being who you are and being willing to continue, being such that you must give in order to fulfill just everything that you stand for. And I definitely want to be the first to say just thanks for taking the time to share your knowledge, your wisdom, and your insight here with us today at the Cashflow Diary, sir.
I enjoyed chatting with you, Jay. I appreciate your inviting me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? That means get over to Amazon, because you heard what I heard. You learned more than one thing today, and I know this. I know that now, maybe, just maybe, I want to question myself a little bit more closely. Have I given 100%? Because then, ladies and gentlemen, that ain't enough. Oh my goodness. So much for us to take home today. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun talking to you guys today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.